Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member for Kootenay, Columbia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm very pleased to rise again for the third time to speak in favour of Bill C-374. And once again, I would like to extend my compliments and gratitude to the member for Cloverdale-Langley City for his work bringing this important piece of legislation to the floor. When that member and I listened to witnesses speak to the Standing Committee on the Environment and Climate Change regarding issues of national heritage, we learned that our treatment of Indigenous heritage has been severely lacking, consistent with much of our treatment of Indigenous peoples. The committee heard that the federal government offers funding to tear down former residential school sites, but no funding to preserve them. That is a shocking disregard of an important, though dark, time in Canada's history. To quote Ry Moran, Director of the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, speaking of the Truth and Reconciliation Report calls to action, central within those calls to action are a number of calls related directly to commemoration. Those commemoration calls relate directly to the creation or establishment of a national memory and our ongoing need as a country to make sure we continue to shine light into the darkest corners of our history. We are fortunate in my riding of Kootenay, Columbia, that the former St. Eugene Mission Residential School has been converted to a hotel, visitor center, casino, and golf course operated by the Ktunaxa Nation Council. Visitors to the center can take a tour to learn the grim history of the building. And we almost lost this important building. The first idea was to tear it down, and of course we know how much anger many Indigenous people have towards residential schools. And the plans were well underway when one of the Ktunaxa elders came forward and said, we need to stop this demolition. We need to take a dark piece of our history and turn it into a positive future. And it's a good thing we did. It is a magnificent resort. In my riding, First Nation bands include the Akam, whose chief is Joe Pierre Jr. The name of the band means Deep Dense Woods. The Akiskanook, led by Chief Alfred Joseph, whose band name means Place of Two Lakes. Chief Mary Masila leads the Tobacco Plains Band, which is also known as Akankunik, meaning the people of the place of the flying head. And Chief Michael Jason Louis leads the Yakanuki, meaning where the rock stands, otherwise known as the Lower Kootenay Band. They're all members of the Ktunaxa peoples. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one other Ktunaxa leader, Chief Sophie Pierre. Chief Sophie Pierre served on the council of the St. Mary's Indian Band, now known as Akam, of the Ktunaxa Nation for 30 years, 26 of them as chief. She is a recipient of the Order of Canada, the Order of British Columbia, the National Aboriginal Achievement Award, as well as 2 honorary doctorates of law from the University of British Columbia and the University of Canada West. Now to the north, the Shuswap Indian Band is led by Chief Barbara Cote. Shuswap is derived from a phrase that means the trout children. And Chief Wayne Christensen leads the Splatson Band Council, also part of the Shuswap people. Splatson is a Salish word that may mean meadow flat. The Shuswap tribe is thought to be a related but distinct people from the Ktunaxa. And I bring these up because these are all great leaders who would make great additions to fill a seat on the Historic Site and Monuments Board once this act is passed. And I tell you this because the histories of these people are interesting and they're important, yet we spend little time and less money on Indigenous history because we don't fully understand it or appreciate it. And that's why one of the calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Report was to amend the Historic Sites and Monuments Act to include First Nations, Inuit, and Métis representation on the Historic Sites and Monuments Board of Canada and its Secretariat. And of course, Bill C-374 fulfills this call to action. The Historic Site and Monuments Board's mandate, according to their website, is to advise the Government of Canada through the Minister of the Environment on the commemoration of nationally significant aspects of Canada's history. Following a thorough evaluation process and recommendation by the Board, the Minister declares the site, event, or person of national historic significance. That is, they evaluate the importance of sites and monuments and decide whether they are significant enough to merit federal protection and support. So currently, the Directory of Federal Heritage Designation includes 3,613 sites and monuments across Canada. It's difficult to tell how many of those are dedicated to Indigenous sites, because often the site will have a name that appears to be related to First Nations, Inuit, or Métis, but the site itself is only recognized because of its relationship to the development of our country by Europeans. That's simply unacceptable, and we need to do better. Only by including Indigenous people in our decision-making can we expect that their cultural, spiritual, and historic places, activities, and beliefs will be properly respected and honored. And of course, this is precisely what Bill C-374 hopes to achieve. In the context of the findings of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the evidence presented to our committee, passage of this very fundamental bill makes tremendous sense. Bill C-374 also improves the board's composition to ensure that all members have the knowledge and experience that will assist with the business of the board. As pleased as I am and as hopeful as I am, I have serious concerns that the government is slow to accept the critical importance of Indigenous history and culture. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission issued 94 calls to action. They were grouped into categories of child welfare, education, language and culture, health and justice. And I'm proud to say that earlier this week, the House supported one of those calls to action in a resolution moved by my colleague, the member for Timmins James Bay. And that resolution said in part that in responding to the call of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to move our nation on a path of true healing for the crimes of the residential school era, the House invite Pope Francis to participate in this journey with Canadians by responding to Call to Action 58 of the Truth and Reconciliation's report and issue a formal papal apology for the role of the Canadian Catholic Church in the establishment, operations, and abuses of the residential schools.
Right.
Now, according to the CBC, as of March 2018, only 10 of the calls to action had been completed. And Bill C-374, if passed, would be number 11 of 94, and I congratulate my friend across the floor for bringing this piece of legislation forward. Bill C-374 will advance our nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous peoples while providing opportunities to preserve critical heritage that we could all learn from. I look forward to seeing the passage of this important bill. It is a positive step forward for heritage in Canada, but there is much more to do. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Bravo.
Good job, Mike.